All right, so now on to documentation. At Elements of Motivation, we use the CarePaths electronic health record, which is found online at eom.carepaths.com. All of your new clients will be already added to your CarePaths account when they are assigned to you. The first couple of things you're going to do in CarePaths is you are going to sign your client acceptance contract. Then you're going to complete your client guardian contact log. And then you're going to go on to do your service intensity screenings, your assessments, treatment plans, notes, anything else that you wanted to put on this client's file. So this is where everything goes. A quick note before we start talking about it, CarePaths does time out for security purposes after 60 minutes. So if you have not saved your work, unsaved work will be lost. But there are, which I will review, save options and also switching tabs options, which you will see. And that will allow you to automatically save your work, which can sometimes really help you. The treatment team that is assigned to the client will be able to see any documents that you create, and you will be able to see any documents that they create. So this helps with coordinating or collaborating for any of your client's treatment. Any treatment team members can also edit a draft document or a saved document, or even a pending document. So if you're trying to collaborate on something like an individual therapist and a family therapist, one person can make the document, other people can go in and change it before it is saved and locked, basically. How you create a new document. So in Elements CarePaths, eom.carepaths.com, once you go and you sign in, you will see a blue search box or a sign that says patients, and you will start there. And so I will show you what that looks like. So we are going to Joe test patient here. So what you see up here is that patient name. That's the box of where you can search for your clients. And then you are going to select the box that says new encounter. And then you are going to create a new document and then select the name of the document that you want to create and create a new draft document. So let's say that we are just contacting Joe. So create new document. You're going to go down to the client guardian contact log, and then this green create a new draft document. Click here, and that pulls it up for you. So whatever you need to be entering on this, just a couple of different things, clicking a couple boxes, and then you're going to come down here, and this is where you do your signature. There was a space, I'll show you where that was. Oops. If you go back to new encounter, every time you create a new document, it gives you the option to auto update, which will update from the most recent document that you saw. So if you want to just do a treatment plan, for example, or a note, and you want to see the most previous note, you would keep this box checked. If you want a completely blank slate, you're going to uncheck that box. And you can practice anything that you want to use in Joe test patient, and that is the very best way to practice because you can't hurt anything there. So there's a couple of differences. At the bottom, you'll see options of save, sign and append, and sign and complete. So when you enter your password, if you click save, it does not actually lock it in any way. It's just saving it, and you don't actually have to sign your name in order to save it. You can just click save, and if you want to delete a document even after you've clicked save, then you can still delete it. Once you sign it, it's going to put your time-stamped electronic signature at the bottom. You can't delete those. Only an administrator can delete those after you have signed it. And there's two options. There's sign and append and sign and complete. Sign and append will keep the document we call unlocked, so that myself as a supervisor, or Lori, for example, or even you or one of your treatment team members can go in and make changes. Once you sign and complete it, it's locked. Nobody else can make any more changes, not even a supervisor. So if a change has to be made, a whole entire new document will have to be created and kind of like start over. Documents that have not been signed will appear as in draft form. Once you sign and pend it, it will say pending. The client acceptance contract is the first document that you are going to be putting into CarePaths. The quality assurance coordinator will be entering that in there on the date that it was assigned. So depending on if you're a therapist or you're the PSR or BST provider, it will be titled one of these, and you will sign and complete it when you are done. So green means sign and complete. You're ready to go. Oops. The different things that will be on this contract will be the client's insurance type, their calendar year limits, like how much they're allowed to use without a PAR in a particular year. If there are any prior authorizations that are already done, the dates and authorized units for that. Other treatment team members, their contact information can be found on our website in the members only portal, and the contracted requirements of accepting that client, which are just our standard company requirements. Second document is going to be that initial contact log. Green, again, means once you complete it, you can sign and complete it. These are all your initial efforts to contact a client if you've had success or some difficulty, and when you have scheduled that initial assessment. Miscellaneous notes can be entered at any time throughout the course of treatment. These are non-billable but maybe clinical encounters. So you can sign and complete all of these miscellaneous contacts, and over here are all the options of things that you might say is the reason for your miscellaneous contact with that family. So you're either emailing, or you're maybe you're doing something out of session on a phone, something, whatever one of those describes what you were doing. And this would be for information that's not covered by other documents. So for example, if they missed or canceled a session, you would use this, not a traditional progress note. I use this like if I have maybe a phone call with a caseworker that's not billable, but I really want to document something in the client's actual file. Again, if you have cancellations or non-compliance, this is a really good way to document that, because it's a part of their record that we can refer back to if we need to. And anybody who can access this client's file will then be able to see maybe why they have had a gap in service or why they've been inconsistent just by reading your notes, and that enables us to not have to contact you and say, this caseworker just called and said that you haven't seen this client in 4 weeks, what's going on? So this is your chance to kind of document your side of what you've been doing to try to communicate with that client. The next thing in a typical first session is completing the EXI, the CASI, or the LOCUS. The naming of them is very simple in CarePaths. This is only going to be for clients for fee-for-service, Silver Summit, or Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield Medicaid. Other kinds of insurance, you do not use this. So this is your first clinical document for these types of insurance. The names of them just follow the exact name of that scoring tool. And yellow means slow down. You need to sign and pend it for the initial screening. If you have already completed initial screening and you are now on your 90-day redetermination, you can sign and complete that. So anything you leave pending will come to Lori or I to sign and review. If you don't need it to be signed and reviewed on that 90-day screening, just sign it yourself and we won't look at it. But all initial screenings need to be signed and pended. And of course, the relevant training videos have to be done before you can score this. And this is recording what their service intensity was at that exact time of that first appointment. The mental health assessment is typically done after the EXI, the CASI, and the LOCUS, and at the second appointment. Yellow again, slow down. You need to sign and pen this for the initial assessment, and you can sign and complete it for any of your 90 to 180 day reassessments. We typically like to see these entered into CarePaths within 72 hours, and they have to be completed in order for them to be billed. So a couple of tips for doing these a little bit faster. I use voice to text dictation so I can speak um, quickly and don't have to type. I also use a couple other tools as well. So I have available for you on our website an assessment template that you can use. One of them has phrases that you can actually use, and then one of them has space for writing, like with some questions to kind of guide your assessment. I also have a pretty general, what we call assessment grid, which is like a bunch of boxes that you can see that have just like topics that you'd be talking about throughout your assessment to make sure you're not missing any major areas. And the last thing that I really like to use, especially with complicated cases, is the test assessment form, which is a Google form. You would use that. I don't use it during an assessment, but if you trust your internet, you can use it during an assessment. I usually complete it after an assessment. It's a bunch of check boxes. You check the boxes. It creates basically paragraphs that can be copy and pasted into CarePaths. It will email the copy to me. So just text me when you complete it, and I will email a copy of it to you right away. Reassessments are done with the same document in CarePaths, and that would usually be about 90 to 180 days. Green means go. You can just sign that once you've done a reassessment. There is a reassessment grid that you can use that kind of highlights some maybe changes or things to take into consideration when you're doing that reassessment. Our Medicaid limits for reassessments, adults get a maximum of 2 assessments per year. So we're definitely on like that 180-day schedule with our adults. But children, especially children who have a CASI or EXI level of 2 or above, which most of our clients do, they can have 4 assessments per year. So if you're running on a 90-day reassessment schedule with them for medical necessity, if that's appropriate, then that is available to you. At a minimum, we do expect that our clients are reassessed every 6 months, and our quality assurance coordinator will contact you when the client is eligible for a reassessment. Again, you want to be following medical necessity guidelines for the reassessments, and that is up to your judgment. So typically within 7 days, let's say they were discharged from some sort of inpatient or residential treatment, maybe they had some sort of big crisis or something that's going to change their diagnosis or add to their diagnosis. Maybe they were released from jail and other legal involvement is pertinent to their treatment, or other changes in their medication or compliance that leads to a change in their symptomology. Within 30 to 45 days, we usually like to see another reassessment done if they've been reunified or they're changing placement or have other changes for permanency, because typically all of that has some impact on their behavior presentation, whether it's progress or regression. That can all be documented in that assessment. In CarePass, some of our documents will also have what we call the DX tab, which DX of course means diagnosis, and we use the DSM-5 or ICD-10 codes, and you want to use billable codes, meaning the primary code is going to be an F code. You can include other codes such as V codes, but your primary billable code is going to be your F code. Codes that cannot be primary codes is going to be things that are like autism spectrum disorder or developmental delays or fetal alcohol. Typically, Medicaid believes that these are very limited in terms of their ability to be rehabilitated, so you don't want to give them an excuse to deny your PAR. If you're working on behaviors that can be addressed with the treatment modalities that you're using, you want to be sure that you're including something that's going to be billable. The date of the diagnosis, I always make sure that the date is the date of the assessment or a date before the assessment. You want to make the start date of your diagnosis one of those times. You don't want to make the start date of your diagnosis after your assessment date. That kind of messes up some things with the programming of care paths, and it won't show up on that document that you created because technically at that day they didn't have that assessment. I mean, that diagnosis. Um, Other things that you can do for specifiers for the diagnosis, if you don't use any specifiers, the F codes will be in random order, but you can do you can write that it's the primary diagnosis or a secondary diagnosis, the focus of treatment, um, and then any other F codes or non-F codes will be in that order. So this is how the order will appear in care paths. The order to me doesn't really matter as long as the billing diagnosis that you're using is a primary F code. Then you're also in some documents going to see a billing tab. The billing tab is something that has to be completed for every document that you see a billing tab. It's going to reflect the date of the actual billable service, and the date will automatically come as the date you're making the document. So if you did the session yesterday and you're doing the note today, you are going to need to change the date to show the actual date of service. And then you're going to also write the time that you went into the session, let's say 5:30, and the time you ended the session. Let's say you did like a hour-long session, so you would say, of course, 6:30 p.m. Um, and then your billing code. You can see some options here for billing codes. All of these are billable um, codes that you're going to be writing on your sheets that you submit each week also for billing, and then you would change the unit. So a lot of these are 1 unit codes, but like some of our codes, like this in-home therapy, the H0004, for example, is not a 1 unit code. That is based on 15-minute intervals, as are PSR and BST. So you would change your units here and then click Save. Sometimes on the billing tab, you'll also see it says due date or next appointment date. That's for your own reference. You do not have to use that if you don't want to. And then the tab called TX plan is also going to show up. That shows your treatment plan. So an active treatment plan is required before a therapy session. So actually you'll create a document called EOM treatment plan or EOM individualized rehabilitative plan V2 if you're a PSR or BST provider. Yellow. Stop, slow down. You need to sign and pen all initial treatment or rehabilitative plans. You are going to be good to go on any 90-day treatment or rehabilitative plan updates. So you can sign and complete those, but you need to slow down and just sign and pen your initial treatment plans for clients. Again, Medicaid guidelines say you should be completing that prior to any regular therapy sessions. They are not billable. You will see a billing tab, and that is so that you can enter the date. Do not put a billing code for the treatment plan. It should be completed in a regular therapy session, so we're not billing for that separately. The client and family does need to be involved in the treatment planning, and there will be a space to indicate that you were involving them in that planning. Usually we have about 3 goals, and these are SMART goals. And if you don't have 3 goals, you might have less, you might have more. It is really up to you and what you are focusing on during session, but it does need to be something that's specific and measurable and something that you think that the client can actually achieve and something that is going to be able to be achieved in the time that you're giving them. So if you're giving them 90 days, are they going to be able to do this large, lofty goal that you have for them? Or do you need to maybe chop that up into smaller, more attainable or reasonable, realistic pieces? You also must enter interventions. So there is a YouTube video that I created on treatment planning. So please view that for a much more detailed view of how to enter your treatment plan in care paths. Your treatment plan will be required to be updated every 90 days, and updates can just be simply changing percentages of like how much they have achieved towards meeting that goal, or it can be more like you're adding new goals or updating progress and regression. There will be a space also to complete the strengths, and I did talk about this in the treatment planning video as well, but the non-guard strengths inventory is something that you can find on our website as well if you're having trouble thinking of what strengths of your clients might actually look like. SMART goals, if you're not familiar with them, are just helping you to think through what are you actually asking the client to do. So examples like if you want them to talk more with other children, well, how is that actually going to look when you're measuring it? So complete 3 turns in a peer conversation during a social group session, or improve communication. What does that look like? Make 10 requests for items using visual support. So it's like, what would you actually be looking for to see that they were meeting that goal? Now you're writing your notes. So you've done a session, it's time to write a note. You've already had the treatment plan completed. You've already done your assessment in your EXI, in your CASI, and your locus. So now writing notes is going to be the thing that you do the most. Every single therapy session needs one. If you're a therapist or a PSR or BST provider, this is how our progress notes are named in care paths. And you were in the session. You can sign and complete it as long as you feel comfortable. If you want someone else to take a look at it, you can sign and pen it, and your supervisor will take a look. Before it is billed, however, it does need to be signed and completed. And we do our notes in what's called a DAP note style. So Data Assessment Plan is what that stands for. And there'll also be a TX or treatment plan tab in your notes. So if you want to make minor adjustments to your treatment plan during a typical session or when you're writing a note, you can do that, and it will change on the actual overall treatment plan for your client. So DAP stands for Data Assessment Plan, as I mentioned. So data is something that's specific and observable, factual, what they said, what was the focus of treatment. The assessment is kind of like, how did it go, or assessing their situation, maybe their progress, and their plan is going to be like, what are you doing in the future? What is the next thing? What kind of homework are you giving them? What kind of referrals are you making? And I think it's important at this point to recognize the difference between a psychotherapy note versus a progress note. This is more of like a legal kind of a thing, but a psychotherapy note or a process note is your private notes, the handwritten notes that you might be making while you're in a session with a client. These are things that you're hypothesizing about or observing, or things you want to ask your supervisor about, or other thoughts that you might have. They're not technically related to the diagnosis or the actual treatment. And these are things that your private, like no one is allowed to see these notes without the patient's authorization. And usually they're just handwritten and they're not a part of their real medical record. We keep it separate. So what we do at Elements in Care Paths is a progress note. A progress note for everybody is very easy, clearly written, consistent from client to client, from session to session, and it can be, and it is meant to be, shared with other therapists who are seeing that client or who are assisting in their treatment. So how much are you supposed to write in order for it to look like a complete note? I think this is something that we all struggle with at times. It is important to not do too many details, and that is to protect the client. But we also want to make sure that we're putting enough in there so that the insurance company will be able to pay for our session if they do request to look at our notes. So you want to make sure you're putting in there like what interventions you're using, how the client responded, is progress being made. That's mostly what they care about. So a good rule of thumb here is if me or Lori asked you on your way out the door, hey, how did your session go with this client today? I only got 30 seconds. Quickly tell me. What would you say in that 30 seconds? That's what should be in your note. So the important stuff will be in your note, and the other stuff will just kind of go away, and you won't have to be writing too much information. Other medical abbreviations that we use in mental health that you've seen a couple of places here. If you aren't familiar, some of the ones that were new to me, the ASX meaning an assessment, SX meaning symptom. So there's a couple different ways you can, when you're fast writing notes, you can use some of these abbreviations. And here is kind of an example of something you could do for a progress note. You're meeting with the client in their family home. They present with these symptoms as evidenced by, what's going on with their diagnosis. What did you do? You processed these thoughts or feelings. Then you processed some current stressors. Maybe you did some psychoeducation. You completed this therapeutic intervention or activity. How did they respond in the session? They actively participated. You reviewed their coping skills, and then you're going to continue to work on this in the future. So very simple, but it's hitting all the bases while also protecting your client. And we can be creative too. Like sometimes, especially in play therapy, like there's the little diagram here that you played the floor is lava with the client, and your documentation could say you coached them using problem solving in a stressful situation, right? So a lot of these are transferable skills. So especially for play therapy notes, you want to be noting what themes that you addressed and what kind of interventions you used with particular toys or particular games, and kind of what the outcome you were looking for was and how did your client respond to using that. If you have a crisis, you are also documenting this in a typical progress note, but you have to put specific things in that note. So you have to be showing that their behavior needed that immediate intervention in order to prevent hospitalization, that they were at a risk of danger to themselves, their behavior was unmanageable by just their family or other community members, and they needed some sort of stabilization or some sort of maybe ongoing other services. That is Medicaid guidelines. So just generally, you always want to be documenting medical necessity, but especially if you're going to be billing for a crisis. So if you want to, or if you can, mention in your documentation in a very clear way that you assessed their mental status, their risk, that they needed some sort of further evaluation if they did, who you kind of communicated with, what kind of maybe substances were being used at the time of this crisis, and then what was the outcome. Especially if you're making calls as a result to the police or filing a police report or making a CPS report, you can also include the report numbers in your progress note. Also in Care Paths, we will be completing our requests for services. Everyone's favorite, the PAR, the prior authorization. The FA11 is the document name that we use for Medicaid, and that's why you'll see that there. It is for fee-for-service Medicaid clients. You are signing and pending that document so that Lori or myself can look at it before it is completed, especially for interns. Interns, you cannot sign your own. You must sign it and pend it, and it has to be signed by a licensed person before it is sent to Medicaid. All sections should be completed, making sure that you are accurately putting in the dates and the units and the services that you want. In PAR training, it goes specifically over how to do that. You should have an updated service intensity score on this as well, and make sure that the treatment plan on file is updated also. Towards the end of treatment, you're going to do a discharge summary when you're no longer going to be seeing that client. Please sign and pend this as well so it can come to the attention of myself or Lori. When you are putting in a discharge summary, make sure that all existing clients' documents in a client's file have been signed by every single clinician that was seeing them. They must all be signed before we discharge that client's file. Also, in the discharge summary, you're going to be writing about the effective or ineffective treatment modalities, why you're discharging them, and what you recommend for further treatment. There's check boxes for all of this, so the discharge summary is actually very quick to complete. Timelines. A planned discharge is 30 days, and an unplanned discharge is 45 days from basically the date of that last session. If you are sending them maybe to another program, Medicaid guidelines say you have 7 days to give a verbal summary of treatment in transferring the services of that client. Other care paths features that you can see, if you have your own questions or problems, there is a help center and you can put in a ticket or you can find a guide to ask your own questions there. You can also track your own authorized units, which is sometimes more hassle than it's worth, but here are the instructions if you would like to do that. Also, if the authorization does not specify a billing code on this authorized units, you can just leave those boxes unchecked and you will be able to track all codes, which can sometimes be helpful, especially if you're on a case with multiple treatment team members. You do not have to do this if you are going to track it yourself somehow. The Care Paths scheduler I mentioned previously, you can use this schedule. You do not have to. You can click on the calendar and it will open up options for you to type in the type of service, the date and the time, and then enter the client's name as well. If you use the scheduler, and this is why I use the scheduler, when you do a completed service, it actually creates a note for you instead of you having to create the note and then you just go in and you actually change the information, the content of the note, but the actual note itself will be created for you. And then finally, if you want to upload documents for a client, like let's say you give some sort of assessment that you want to scan and upload into their file, or you have a genogram or something. When I administer like a Beck's anxiety inventory, I scan and upload a copy of that assessment into their actual CarePaths file. So a summary reminder is when you get the referral, you're going to have to sign a contract to accept that client. Once you schedule them, you are doing the contact log in CarePaths. You complete, if their insurance allows it, the locus, the CASI, or the EXI, then a mental health assessment, and then the treatment plan. Depending on what you want of services for that client, you might have to do a PAR, or you can just go straight into doing your first sessions and doing progress notes from there. Then, however many sessions that you get, you can then probably do a PAR at some point in your time of seeing this client. And of course, we say be safe and enjoy your work. If you have any questions with CarePaths, let us know. A couple other notes about documentation that you might come across that do not involve CarePaths is writing letters for clients. So a couple different kinds or scenarios where you'd have to write letters for clients would be like for court or a caseworker. Sometimes they will request progress or what's the client's involvement in treatment. Sometimes I've had this before where a welfare caseworker or sometimes a disability caseworker wants proof that your client is attending treatment. The school, you might write a letter to help them to do an IEP or to begin a 504 evaluation. Sometimes Social Security will ask you for information that they need for disability or to confirm a diagnosis, or if their symptoms are having an impact on their functioning presently and if they're expected to impact them in the future. And then also sometimes a landlord will ask you to write a ESA letter or an emotional support animal letter confirming that there's an animal in the home and the purpose of that is for mental health support reasons. So there are other reasons that letters might come up. I do have a guide with letterhead on our website if you would like help writing letters. And of course, if you are an intern or anybody really, your supervisor should be looking over your letter before you send it. And also, best case I like to do is give the letter directly to my client and have them give it to whoever they want, because then you don't need a release. If the client is releasing that letter themselves, then you don't need a release of information for wherever that letter is going. In the case of the emotional support animal letter, sometimes clients don't really understand the difference between an ESA and a service animal. And if you don't know either, this is just a little quick review. An emotional support animal helps, in our cases, typically with a mental health disability. Typically, you have to have anxiety, depression, agoraphobia, or PTSD in order to qualify. So it is up to your own clinical judgment if you want to write a letter for a client. If you decide to write this letter, it should be you that are currently treating the client for that condition, and the letter is an official document that you will sign. And what this allows the client to do, which is why they're asking for it, is it will exempt them from regulations that prevent animals in certain places. So, for example, if there's housing where animals are not allowed, then they would be able to have their animal there. If the housing has a fee for having an animal, this would be able to allow them to waive the fees. So if you believe that it is in your client's best interest in regards to their mental health to have this animal, then you can write this letter. And there is an example letter of this on our website that you can use or edit as you wish. A service animal is something that we cannot authorize at all. This is a specifically trained animal, a very expensive to train animal that is like, a leader dog for people who are visually impaired. So that is something that we do not do, of course.